What's up, everybody? We hope you had a good holiday if you celebrate. If not, we hope you had a good vacation if you got one of those. If you didn't, I hope you had a regular week that was fantastic.
Yeah, I wish you all tidings of no toe stubbing. So I hope that you at least achieved that over the past week.
Mike, I got to say, you're pulling a pretty cool one out of your hat here tonight. When you told me what we're going to talk about, I mean, I was stoked because I knew you were going to bring something cool, but I was just shocked that there was anything to really bring as far as Stargates were concerned.
Don't thank me, thank Kurt Russell.
David Spader.
Especially David Spader.
Have you ever heard of a Stargate?
And also MacGyver, because he played David Spader in the series.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was MacGyver. Or maybe he played, I don't know. MacGyver was in it. I can't remember which role he played, but there was definitely a MacGyver in the series. Because obviously they can't get Kurt Russell or David Spader to be, James Spader. Yeah, James Spader to come on and do some TV knockoff. So they got the next best thing and hired MacGyver.
Yikes, I didn't know that about that franchise.
Yeah. Apparently the show is pretty good. I've only seen an episode here or there, but they got into some pretty cool concepts.
Well, have you ever heard of a Stargate before the movie Stargate?
I did not, but apparently there's been talk of a Stargate sort of thing for a long time, and there's actually a lot of evidence to kind of back it up in myth and legend all over the world. From I believe the one in the movie was found in Egypt, so it was all Egypt themed and everything. But they're all over these alleged sites, and we're gonna kind of get into some ancient alien territory here, but I'm not going to go the souk route and just claim that it's aliens just because it's advanced. You know, there's other explanations possibly, and even if we want to go go down the road that this is an actual Stargate, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're aliens. But that's neither here nor there at the moment. What's interesting, though, is that there's all these different sites all across the world where in the mythic and legendary tradition, there's a lot of things that kind of tie these sites together. And in some cases, these are said to be sites where the gods come to Earth or where we can communicate with the gods. And the fact that we're seeing similar things all over the world, it's kind of interesting. Like, it makes me feel like it's more than just a myth. Like, there's got to be something to it, you know, other than just a neat story. And we in modern religion we have things like that. In Islam, there's that. I can't remember what it's called, and I apologize to all our Islamic listeners, but it's like this big box that has a black rock in it that was supposed to have come down from heaven, and I guess it's some sort of meteor or something, but it's got sacred significance. And then there's the stories about the gods descending from the earth and coming here, and in Christianity, all the stories of angels descending to earth, or the weird Ezekiel's wheel, or the story of Enoch being taken away by an angel. And just like all these things. So I know it sounds kind of like we're going to be doing an Ancient Aliens show, but that's not the case. What I want to talk about specifically is fucking Stargates, and the fact that there's some of these things may have actually been real. So there's a lot of them. There's some in Egypt. I'm gonna kind of just go through a bunch of them and just use them as examples, but I'm gonna focus mainly on the one of the ancient Sumerian ones that is supposed to have been located somewhere in Iraq. So that's going to be the primary focus here, but just get to kind of touch on a few. There's one in before I get into it, let's just say these are all alleged. There's no actual evidence here showing that a Stargate existed. This is all theory and conjecture that's posited by mostly ancient alien people. But I just want to throw this out there just for examples so that everyone's got it, and you can do your own research as to whether or not it was or is a Stargate. But there's one in Egypt in Abu Ghraib called the Place of the Gods. And this place, it's an ancient platform that's made of alabaster, which is Egyptian crystal. And it's said that this structure or this platform is in tune with the vibration of the earth. And by approaching it and touching it, it can open your senses, and a person can use this to communicate and be one with higher energies that exist in the universe. Whether this is intelligent energies or God energy, or I don't know. I've never been there, so I can't comment firsthand. But it said that this was something that contained sacred energies that would commune with so people in ancient Egypt would use it to commune with the gods. Like, I would assume it would be the priests and maybe the pharaohs. But the idea here of this structure and being able to open up communication between our world and another world kind of mirrors some legends that are found in Native America by the Native Americans. So there's a Cherokee legend of these things called thought beings who would travel on sound, but they came from the Pleiades star system, these thought beings. So it sounds like they were talking about receiving these communications, like the channeling, from beings that existed in the Pleiades star system. And they were able to kind of broadcast this as sound and project their thoughts to these people. And this area was said to do the same thing and allow people that were there to open their senses and begin communication with higher beings. So that's just one example from Egypt. And obviously, anything that is kind of weird gets thrown around. Like the site in Abydos, Egypt, that's got the helicopter and the rocket ship looking thing in the hieroglyphs. This was actually the same place that we talked about that was discovered by Dorothy Eady, who said that she was the peasant girl who had lived here and knew about all this stuff, and they were able to discover the site because of her. So some people think because of the fact that there's these weird hieroglyphs that resemble spaceships and helicopters, and the alleged reincarnated person from this era discovered it, that might be evidence to suggest that there's some sort of Stargate or time portal thing that exists here. I'm not inclined to believe that, but who am I? I'm just some guy talking about shit on the internet. But we can even look at things, more well-known things like Stonehenge, for instance, and that does have astrological alignments. And
does it? I always heard about the acoustics and the. Are you familiar with that?
no, I'm not familiar with that.
They do. They've done a lot of experiments with sound, playing tones in there and drumming and stuff like that. And there's certain places where you can stand to where, I mean, I've seen people do it on film, where it's like a certain vibration to where they feel tranced out, and that's one of the aspects of why they lend that place to being some type of ritual place.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know about the acoustics. I know it lines up with the sun. I think it's during the vernal equinox. If it's one of the turns of the season. I think it's the equinox though, but it lines up with the sun, and we don't really know exactly the age of it. The mainstream academia says that it was most likely built around 5,000 years ago, and that the site was quarried. The stones were quarried from a place that was over 200 miles away. But there's a geologist named Brian John who suggests that there's no actual evidence, and this is just speculated, that these stones were quarried. They've never actually found the quarry site, I guess. So it's just assumed because the bluestone exists in an area 200 miles away that they were quarried in that area, but they've never actually found the area where they were removed from. You know, it's just speculation, but a lot like the Sphinx in Egypt, there's a lot of evidence that among the oral tradition that seem to suggest that when the first settlements came in this area 5,000 years ago, that Stonehenge was already there. And this site is built on an area where 14 ley lines meet. So we know, well, I shouldn't assume, but ley lines are these lines that run through the earth, where along these lines you'll always find sacred sites, churches, temples, things like that. And they go in these lines. So you follow the line, and all along that line, you'll find places of worship or sacred sites. And this is where 14 of those lines converge. So you'd have to assume that if there's a site where 14 of these lines converge, this is going to be a very powerful site. And it's thought that maybe because of the way that it was aligned and the fact that it's on 14 lines, that this might be an area where a Stargate or a portal existed. And to kind of further that notion, this area is also one of the major hotspots for crop circles as well. So I say what you will about crop circles. There's a lot of people on both sides that claim that their way is the only way. I've recently heard about some evidence, and this would be for a whole nother show, so I don't really want to get too deep into the whole crop circle thing, but there is some new evidence that has come out fairly recently, I believe the last 10 years or so, that seem to indicate that crop circles may be created from within the earth rather than something pressing down. It's more something pulling down, having more to do with magnetics maybe. Or an energy vortex.
Malarkey
was aliens, I tells you. Aliens!
When you hear about stuff like that, like Stonehenge being built on the convergence of, what'd you say, 14 ley lines?
Yeah, 14.
I mean, how could they have... that's not coincidence, one. And two, how could they have possibly done that if it's that old? I mean, people gloss over that, but that's just impossible right there.
And that's kind of where a lot of this stuff comes in, is the fact that there's stuff that exists that we're finding that's unbelievably old. And there's a lot of things that we attribute to an old civilization, something we consider ancient but advanced, and it doesn't match anything that they did, or it seems like they tried to copy these things in some cases. Like with the pyramids, we see a decline in the way that the pyramids were built. Like you've got the Great Pyramids, which were fucking perfect, but then you've got the Bent Pyramid, which was built much later. You would assume that if you were the same culture that built these pyramids, that you would be improving on that over time, rather than having the design degrade over time. You know, that
Right.
doesn't make sense. That would be like, okay, you've built the Empire State Building, but now you forgot to how to build anything bigger, and you can't even replicate what you did with the Empire State Building, and if you try, it's going to just fall apart and look like shit. You know, which isn't the case. We built the Empire State Building, and now we've got so many buildings that are bigger than the Empire State Building, that are stronger and taller and wider. And not that the Empire State Building was the tallest or anything, but it's just like one of the most iconic tall buildings, you know. But it just doesn't make sense. So it seems like maybe throughout the world, these gates were developed, and in some cases destroyed. Like if you look over at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, what we've discovered, we know is older than anything we've discovered up to this point. The ruins of Göbekli Tepe seem to date back to around 12,000 years ago, which this predates any civilization that we're aware of. According to mainstream history, at this point in time, humans were still hunter-gatherers. We didn't have architectural buildings. We didn't have big cities. You know, it was mostly just kind of nomadic living, or if we were gathering together, it would have been in huts. It wouldn't have been these huge complex structures. But what we found here in Göbekli Tepe is this huge site that was found beneath a cemetery from the Byzantine era. So initially, when it was dug up, it was thought to be part of this site, and then when excavation really started happening, it was discovered that this was much later, and there was this part that was uncovered that was a bunch of rings made out of these T-shaped stone pillars, and on each of the pillars there was an engraving, typically of some sort of animal. And then in the middle of all these circles, there were two more pillars that stood, that kind of created an archway. And within this archway, it was supposed to be used as a portal to the sky world, where they could meet with their gods, or allow their gods to come through to this site. Now, an interesting thing with this theory is that while this site was supposed to have been built 12,000 years ago, the entire site was deliberately buried 2,000 years after it was built.
That's raising a city, right? I mean, that could have been a place that was conquered.
Well, they didn't even. It wasn't raised though. It was just buried, and this wasn't a city. It was just this big complex, and this has another tie to the Pleiades star system, because part of the thing that we excavated matches up with the main stars in the that we would see from Earth in Pleiades.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you've got that connection, and further connection with the Pleiades star system in South America, where it's said that their gods came from that star system as well. And then you've got the ancient Native Americans, the Cherokees, that are claiming the same thing. But then you got these weird gates in South America. There's the Gate of the Gods in Peru, and that one is you may have seen it on Ancient Aliens. It's the big, it's like a flat surface, and then there's a perfect square carved out of the face of this big rock, made perfectly flat. It's 7 meters wide, 7 meters tall. And then inside of it, there's indentation cut into this flat face that kind of looks like, I guess, a vague T shape, or maybe like the back of a chair or something. But then in the center of that, there's a circular impression about the size of a hand. Not the shape of a hand, but the size of a hand. But it's a perfect circle. And there's a legend. So well, before I get into the legend, this thing is called the Gate of the Gods. And it's said that this would act as a gate that would allow great heroes to go join their gods, but it would also allow them to come back with their gods, and they would be able to inspect the lands in the kingdom by coming back through this gate. But there's a legend that tells of a time when the Spanish conquistadors were coming through Peru, and they were looting gold and all the gems and everything from the Incan tribes. But there was a priest from the Temple of the Seven Rays named Amaru Meru, and he left the temple with the sacred golden disc that was known as the Key of the Gods of the Seven Rays, and he ran into the mountains. And when he was trying to hide and escape, he came upon this doorway, which was being watched by a bunch of priests. And he showed them the key, and they performed this ritual. And at the end of the ritual, they put this disc into the indentation, which opened this portal up. And once the portal opened up, the legend states that blue light poured through from a tunnel inside that opened up. And Amaru Meru handed over the golden disc to the other priests, and then walked into the portal and was never seen again.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah.
And there's another place in Tiahuanaco, Bolivia, and it was there's a thing called the Gate of the Sun, and it was found that this entire site was destroyed by the Spanish when they were coming through. At one point, they had destroyed or attempted to destroy the entire area. But when the site was discovered, they found the gateway to the sun, which had fallen over and been split almost down the middle. But the gateway of the sun itself is another flat structure with a place cut out for a door, and then above it is the sun god, who appears to be crying. And this is another one of those sites where it's thought that this was it's the gateway of the sun, so this was believed to be the place where the sun god would show up. And this is thought that this was maybe another Stargate that predates the Incan people, and maybe it was left behind by an older culture. I mean, there's a lot of evidence in South America that suggests that the native people there did have interactions with other civilizations. You know, the fact that there's statues of bearded, what looks like Vikings, and statues of what looks like Africans, it would suggest that they had experience with these people at some point.
Yeah, those statues in particular are very striking. It's very clear depictions of other races, and you know they sculpt them in a way to where it's plain to see that they don't look like them at all, like the carvings of them. It's very interesting.
All that kind of leads me to this idea of an advanced culture that existed long before any cultures that we're aware of. Maybe it was a human culture, maybe it was a pre-human culture. We know that there were other hominid species that existed at the same time as humans. So maybe it was that this other species was more advanced than we were, and we were the more warlike and stupid people, and we killed them off or fucked them out of existence.
There's something that always sticks out to me when we talk about this type of stuff, and you're talking about everything you're talking about are examples of these places to where humans were to be able to interact with their gods. And it just seems so weird that there's such easy access to their gods. And for these places to exist, it kind of speaks to that. Like they're there for a reason. So that kind of lends to them being advanced.
Yeah.
These aren't really cool farms or intricate buildings we're talking about. These are places that are supposed to let them talk to their gods. Yeah. So that's exactly advanced.
And it could just be early people were dumb, and they would come across this technology, and because it was so much beyond where humans were at that point in time, it was magic. It was the gods. But maybe it was just another hominid species that kind of evolved before humans. And now when we find all these stone structures, we attribute them to the humans that settled there after they left. But there's a lot of stories of, they're called the gods. They're, according to Tsoukalos, they're aliens. But what if they were just another advanced species that was living here, and they found a way to how we think we're so cool because we were able to go to the moon. They were able to discover a way to go to another world, and a way to create a wormhole and use that to go to another world. And where they got that from, who's to say? Maybe aliens gave it to them. Maybe they were just advanced and knew how the universe worked and were able to understand how it worked and use that in a way that seems like magic, but it was really technology of the time that they were able to tap into. And maybe it is all about vibrations and sound and frequency, and that's what opens it, and they're able to direct that to the place, and they saw, maybe they were able to see ahead or could see the writing on the wall and knew what type of species we, the humans, were, and they're like, fuck this, we want nothing to do with this, let's bail. So they just did a mass exodus and they took off and they left. And then ancient man, whenever they got their heads out of their ass in their respective areas and started a civilization, they built it on these because the foundation was already there. And if you're a starting civilization, you're going to start it around what's already there. You're not going to, if you've got fucking pyramids and statues and the foundation of buildings, why would you do all that work yourself when you could just appropriate it and be like, hey, no one was here, we discovered this is now, like the Sphinx, for instance, the head doesn't match the body. It's way too small proportionately, and we know what type of feats the ancient Egyptians were capable of, so it doesn't make sense that they would build this huge thing and give it a little tiny head. If they were to make the body match the head, it would still be a massive structure. It wouldn't be little by any means, but it doesn't make sense to give it this little tiny head, which seems to indicate that the head was carved in a different way, or carved later to represent a king or a pharaoh of the time.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So all of this leads me back to Samaria, or maybe before Samaria. There is this story that kind of has been going around, and this goes back to the 1920s, and I believe that this story is what inspired the movie Stargate. They put it in Egypt because it's sexier.
Yeah.
You know, like you make a movie about ancient Samaria and most people are going to be like, huh? What? But you say Egypt,
Right.
everybody can immediately identify ancient Egypt stuff. So it's not, it's far more popular and way sexier. 1990s Kurt Russell sexy even.
Yeah. Buzz cut.
Yeah.
Camo.
Beret.
Suicidal thoughts.
All of it. But in the 1920s, there was apparently a discovery under the ziggurat of Ur that's in modern-day Iraq. But it was this ancient Sumerian site, and it was alleged that beneath this ziggurat was a Stargate. And since then, there've been wars and battles trying to get this back. And the first big one, I guess, was during World War II, during the Anglo-Iraqi War of 1941. So this was going on at the same time as World War II, but it really seemed to be an extension of World War II because it was fought between the British, who was in that area at the time, going against the Iraqi nationalists who were being funded and supported by the Nazis and Italy. The idea here was that Hitler was sending his troops to discover I shouldn't say discover, to find and bring back the Stargate. And he was using the Iraqi nationalists basically as cannon fodder against the British to keep the British busy while the Nazis were looking for this item. And there's been all the rumors of Hitler, especially towards the end of World War II, looking for ancient relics of power. Like the most famous is the Spear of Destiny and the Ark of the Covenant, thinking that if he could amass all these ancient, powerful, supernatural items, that he would be able to harness their power and become the king of the universe. But he didn't find them, at least that what we know. But he did get his ass kicked. So, good for us. But he was well known for seeking all this stuff out. So that was really the first instance. But as we know, the U.S. has a history in the Middle East and in Iraq specifically. And interestingly, Iraq was used kind of as an ally / pawn of the United States in a conflict against Iran in the 80s. And then things changed in the 90s when George H.W. Bush took over. And we ended up having the Gulf War, which it started out as Desert Shield to protect the citizens of Kuwait from the invading Iraqi army, to Desert Storm, which apparently was at that point it was considered a conflict rather than a defense mission. But the whole backing was for the initial invasion in 1991 was this false statement that was given by this 15-year-old girl, Naira El-Sabah. And anyone who was alive back then probably remembers seeing this clip. I think it was from the late 90s, or late 1990 rather, because we went to war in 91. But she claimed to have been a volunteer at a hospital where Iraqi soldiers came in and they took all the babies out of the incubators and just left them to die on the floor, and took all the incubators away, and they were capturing and torturing people who were opposing the Iraqi invasion, and basically just all this really terrible stuff to show that the Iraqi army / government were evil monsters that were killing babies and torturing innocent people. It was later confirmed that this entire testimony was completely false, and it was being used as propaganda to get support for preemptive action in Iraq. Now, there's a lot of things that you can say that that was the reason for this initial conflict to take place. But for the sake of this show, let's put our tinfoil hats on and get fucking weird.
Yeah.
So with this attack, it's thought that we were trying to get the Stargate from Saddam, who he apparently had it there's this rumor, and I haven't been able to find too much out about it, but apparently under one of Saddam's palaces there's this thing called the Dark Ziggurat, which was a building that was built by an ancient Sumerian wizard, and though he ended up becoming a leader in ancient Sumeria, but this Dark Ziggurat was supposed to be the site where the Stargate was moved to after it was discovered under the Ziggurat of Ur, and it existed under a palace, under one of Saddam's palaces. Now, during this conflict and the later conflict in 2003, there's an area that was protected, and it was protected. It was said that this is where all the government workers lived and worked, so it was protected from bombing, but it also included these areas where it was thought that the Stargate could have been. But after the conflict, the initial conflict, Bill Clinton came into power. He became president, and he had 2 terms. And as soon as he got out of office, George W. Bush came in. Now, what a lot of people don't know about George H.W. Bush is that he was the head of CIA for a while. Then he became the vice president to Reagan, and then became president himself. He's tied to a lot of sketchy stuff, especially in the conspiracy circles, and I'm sure not all of it is warranted. But if he was the head of CIA, he would have known a lot about the UFO stuff. He would have known a lot about the JFK assassination. There's some that even suggest that he may have had a hand in the JFK assassination, or that he knew about it in some way, shape, or form at that point in time. But there's also a lot of things that go in with him covering up UFO sightings and having a role in keeping it secret during his time with the CIA. Which also, if you believe in the grand conspiracy where there's a they or a them with a capital T that's behind all the governments of the world, it would be interesting that you'd put a guy like George H.W. Bush, who's tied to covering up all these conspiracy things, with a president like Reagan, who is very open and hopeful about the idea of extraterrestrial contact and UFOs and things like that. So it would be interesting when you've got someone who's really into it as president, and then you put someone who knows about it and who's been active in covering it up as his vice president to keep him in check, so that he could kind of steer him down different road or a different aisle or whatever. But once George W. Bush came into power, we had 9/11, which led to the war in Afghanistan, and then using flimsy ties to the 9/11 attack and this whole weapons of mass destruction thing, he started a a war with Iraq again, with the blessing of Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister of the UK at the time. But it was against the wishes of the UN. So the US and the UK went off on their own against the UN and attacked Iraq in March of 2003. Now, again, you can say that this was because there's weapons of mass destruction, but as we all know now, there was never any weapons of mass destruction. And Bush knew that.
Yeah, there never were.
And this was something that was known. It was something that had been reported. There was no evidence, but we still went on saying that there were weapons of mass destruction. Now, what if we're considering that the Stargate was a thing and this was the weapon of mass destruction? And we had, when he got the intelligence was about this specific item, not about nuclear bombs, not about biological dirty bombs, not about any of that stuff. This was about the Stargate and the fact that we didn't want someone like Saddam Hussein to have the Stargate. So we wanted it. And maybe he was threatening to use it. Maybe we found out through spies that he was learning how to use it or had figured something out that we didn't think he knew and we felt we needed to go in. It seems weird to me that there was a gap between the two Bushes, that when Bill Clinton was president, that there was no conflict. And if this thing was a big threat, that I feel like he would have been kind of let in about it. But you look at where we're going now, we've kind of injected ourselves into Syria now, which is bordering Iraq. The war in Iraq led to the current situation in Syria because we took Saddam out of power, so it destabilized the region. And now we're talking about potential, Iran has been on our radar for a while, and they're also bordering Iraq. And again, this could be a subject for another show, but Iran has a lot of interesting stories that relate to UFOs. So could that be tied in? I mean, this entire region is incredibly ancient. This was where civilization began in this area. So it's
right.
It's interesting that we keep stirring shit up in this area. And sure, we can claim that there's oil, but the U.S. produces enough oil that if we stop selling it, we could be self-sufficient with oil. So it's not like we need the oil in other countries. I mean, you can always point to greed, I suppose, and the fact that war pays lots of people lots of money. But it's just interesting that this is the region that we keep stirring shit up in, and South America. And these are the regions where these things exist. Now, I shouldn't say after, because we still technically have troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, but we ousted the government of Iraq, and there was a group known as Task Force 20, and apparently their role was to hunt down Saddam Hussein while he was in hiding. But there were a lot of reports from soldiers as well as government workers, people in the Iraqi military, and civilians that would say that these people would come in to the government buildings and they would just take all these ancient artifacts, and there were a lot of things that went missing from museums and government buildings that came from ancient Samaria, and there's never been anything to say where they went. They just, this group rolled up and they stole the shit. Some of it did find its way into the black market, but most of it was never heard from again. And it's priceless things, this came from ancient Samaria. It's not like you can just go to the ancient Samaria store and buy ancient Sumerian tablets to summon ancient Sumerian demons. It doesn't work that way. But they're they were missing, and it's tied to this group that was hunting for Saddam as well. So, I mean, and that's interesting too. What if they found Saddam and the hanging was a farce? The person they hung was one of his lookalikes, and they were milking Saddam for all of the information he had on how to use it. And I'm sure once they got the information from him, he died. But I'm gonna go off on a even crazier conspiracy all this talk of disclosure could directly tie into the discovery and use of these stargates. Now, we've always in the past heard from the government and the military that there's no interest in UFOs and there's no evidence that they exist or that there's anything to even worry about. And then over the past couple of years, we find out about the official Navy released videos of these UFOs saying they don't know what it is. It doesn't fly like anything that we know about. And then they admit to this program studying them, and they're putting all this stuff out, seemingly working with To the Stars Academy to get this information into the public. And it's being talked about seriously on the news now. And if the Stargate is working, is it possible that the people that are using it are allowing things to come through now? And or maybe they're not even allowing things to go through. They're just figuring out how it works, and they're able to use it as a bridge to another place. And they're disclosing all this stuff about UFOs to make the future disclosure of teleportation, or however you harnessing wormholes. They're just using the UFOs as a way to explain this jump in technology. Like, oh no, we found these UFOs, and eventually they're going to say that they've got these crashed craft. They'll finally admit to that, and then say they were able to reverse engineer this stuff, and as a result, they've been able to find a way to jump from one world to the next. And it's not teleportation. We're folding space and time, and we're able to get there with very little effort.
I tend to agree with that, because I said when you did, I think it was your second Mike Rant show on disclosure, that if they're going to show us this shit like the Tic Tac video and start telling us about this shit, I wonder what they're softening the blow for. And that very well could be something like that, the use of teleportation and stuff like that. It also is a good cover on why to go to war in places. If they tell us about UFOs and put that type of abstract reality, or what would be abstract reality to the whole world, not thinking that aliens existed or they wouldn't see it in their lifetime, that's gonna spur people to get behind fighting some bad guy who has a goddamn Stargate.
Yeah, I mean, bad guys with Stargates are one thing. It makes for a good spy movie. It doesn't really make sense to tell the general public that we have to go to war so that this guy can't access the Pleiades system and contact aliens.
Well, I mean, they can say that this Stargate does whatever the fuck they want. He can say he's going to bring in hordes like in the Avengers movie. Everybody knows what that's like.
Yeah. We've all seen the Avengers at this point. That's all you got to tell us. He's trying to do what Loki did at the end of Avengers. Oh, no, he's not. Fuck that guy. Let's blow him up. We saw the Avengers. We don't want that happening. We don't want sky whales coming through New York City. We don't have a Hulk.
We're going to do that to him. That we know of.
That we know of. I mean, there are all those rumors of super soldiers, so who's to say, really?
There's not many of them, which leads me to believe that it's very well kept under wraps. They don't allow rumors to get out.
No, they'll kill you.
Yeah, they're like, dude, if you let this out, we'll just have this super soldier snap your head off.
Yeah.
So just shut up.
We'll squeeze your head until it pops.
That's why the only ones that come out are about that dude who was a dolphin soldier.
Good old dolphin soldier. Love that guy.
He's all, fuck that. I'm not scared of no dolphin.
And then he sonic screams and your head explodes. But there are kind of some things that exist in modern time, both maybe fictional and real. So the Montauk Project, and remember they had the God, was it the God chair? I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah.
But where they would have someone sit in this chair and they were able to open up a portal to another dimension. And then there was the time when they let some crazy hair beast come through and destroy the universe, or at least a couple of rooms before it was put down. But that's just hearsay, really. We don't really know for certain if that's real. It's probably not. But it could be an extension of MK Ultra, which is the most likely scenario, I think. But if these stories are true, then maybe they were tapping into some of the same sort of thing that the ancient cultures were doing when they were developing these stargates. But then even more recently and absolutely verifiable is the Large Hadron Collider. And there have been representatives from CERN that have said that they are trying to look into other worlds or other dimensions through this thing. And there's even a quote from one of the scientists saying that in the future could see them. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was basically something along the lines of the future could see them peering into other worlds, or maybe pulling something into ours. So it would seem to suggest this same sort of thing that we're thinking of when we think of a Stargate, and they're trying to open those. And then you have weird things like the Norway spiral. Like, what the fuck was that? They can say it was a Russian missile all they want, but that thing, the way that thing dissolved was, it looked like a fucking portal opening up, and it dissolved from the inside out.
Yeah, even all the videos that we have of rockets at night, we can definitely compare them and know that that's a rocket. And we can even make examples of stuff they won't say it's a rocket and go, come on, that's a fucking rocket. And that shit was not a rocket at all. I don't believe so.
And there were things that blamed that on CERN and also HARP.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, like I think that what we're seeing from the disclosure side of things could be opening us up to further developments that seem impossible at the moment. And I think that I've got to, and I hate to sound like Alex Jones or some shit, but I think that there's more to a lot of these things, and there's a reason why there's a lot of conspiracies that kind of link together, and like this one with the war in Iraq, kind of stemming out of 9/11. It's a classic bait and switch type of thing, and there's so much crazy shit that goes into the 9/11 thing. I don't even want to begin to touch on it because there's just so much stuff, and some of it's plausible, other stuff is completely ridiculous. But there's just, I mean, that's a rabbit hole on its own. But the fact that that's tied into this Iraq conspiracy with the Stargate, and now coming out of that, we're getting the UFO disclosure, and it seems weird that all this stuff is being tied together. And you tie that to George H.W. Bush, bring it back, or to George W. Bush, then you bring it back to George H.W. Bush, who was involved with the first Iraqi conflict, who also has ties with UFO cover-ups and maybe the JFK assassination. So it's a whole weird conspiratorial orgy of fucking weirdness.
I mean, the alien thing is the perfect cover, man. All they got to do is say is their spaceships don't fly; they teleport. So that people get ready for that. Expect
they've
that.
already
There's
been they've already been
now,
talking about that. Tom DeLonge has been saying that these craft are able to maneuver by manipulating the gravity around it, which affects it the way that it moves through time and space. So it's essentially kind of like a personal time travel device. You know, not so much where you'd set your gauge to the 1700s and go chill out with people during the Revolutionary War, but it's more like the way that it moves and gets from one place to another. It's manipulating time, so it's a time machine in that regard. But that's shit that To the Stars Academy has been saying for the past few years now.
Well, let's just wait till they do disclose the alien stuff, and there's all the things that they're gonna include in the package of what is an alien. It's gonna explain a lot of shit, and
it's like a lot of things with trying to get information to the public. You put it in fiction first, and for the past 50 years, 60 years now, we've had aliens in our movies, and it's been a visual thing. You look at the shit movies from the 50s with those really cheesy flying saucers and all that stuff, but it was kind of you could look at it as being early way to prep humanity. And the fact that now all of these type of movies are all done, they all have a really close working relationship with the military. The military always consults on all of these movies, and it's interesting that they've got military consultants. And you can say it's because it's the military is fighting the aliens in the movies and blah blah. Yeah, but it's a movie. You know, you don't need to have the actual military come in and be like, this is how we would fight aliens, and make it up. You know, it's fiction. So it kind of leads me to believe that they've got a special division that's kind of making sure certain things are touched upon in works of fiction, even in cases where the military don't win. They still have to hit certain points, or even movies where it's not a conflict, where it's more of a contact. They're still involved.
Yeah,
and propaganda is a crazy thing, man, and it feels like, well, I shouldn't say it feels like, because it's been proven that to be effective is putting the propaganda in entertainment and using that as a means of disseminating information.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's like I always say, it's always a little bit of truth with a whole lot of bullshit. And you can look at that in disinfo or disclosure through fiction. They're both similar. They're both bullshit with little kernels of truth. So in summary, Kurt Russell is really a space jumping time hero, and he looks really awesome in a beret.
Well, one last question I have for you before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
Is do you think that, I mean, all these sites exist and they all do weird shit besides open gates to gods, and just being put on top of ley lines, like you said, or acoustic stuff, or all the weird things the pyramids do and that surround them. What if it wasn't an ancient race or civilization or aliens or anything like that, and it was just the use of magic, be it a glowing wand or just fucking mix this berry with this leaf and smoke it and stand here and you'll see God? Maybe it's just something that humans
like
lost
actual
touch
magic.
With. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things to suggest that we as humans took a step back, and I think that kind of came with the rise of technology, when we stopped being so reliant on the earth for our survival. When we separated ourselves from nature, I think that's when we really started to lose it, because a lot of these ancient structures, line up with celestial bodies or have certain astrological alignments. And they also kind of work with natural acoustics, like you said with Stonehenge, but the same can be said for a lot of sacred sites, that acoustics play a very big role. And you have to have knowledge of that area of the earth and knowledge of how sound carries and where vibrations exist strongest in what stone. And it even going so far as food and shelter, all of that stuff was relied upon by ancient man, and we needed the earth to provide that for us. You know, we couldn't just go to the local Home Depot and get pre-cut 2x4s to build a shack. It was something we had to cut down the trees. We had to strip it. We had to develop the beams to create the structure that we want. If we wanted clothes, we had to either weave the clothes out of plants or kill an animal and use its skin. And then we would use that animal to also eat and make our weapons. And there was a lot of things that we had to rely upon. And as technology became easier and easier to acquire, it made our ties to nature less and less needed. And so technology kind of became the new god, for lack of a better term. And the old ways kind of fell to the wayside, because why pray to gods and perform this ritual if I can just use this machine and do the same thing?
Must be some pretty chill gods that just gave them their number and they're just like, yeah, hit me up whenever.
Yeah, you just got to do this. And that's the thing. Like, you look in ancient texts, whether it be something as recent as the Bible or something as far back as the myths from Sumeria, we see evidence of the higher beings contacting mankind. But interestingly, after these times are recorded, there's no more talk of these beings contacting mankind. It's like we've been abandoned by our gods. If our gods existed, they've abandoned us and left us here by ourselves. It's kind of depressing, really, if you think about it. Like, we've got thousands of years worth of religious beliefs, tens of thousands of years of religious beliefs that come and they go. They all kind of echo each other, but they all reference a time when our gods or our some sort of higher being came down to earth and communicated with humankind and saved us and taught us this and gave us that. And then they just disappeared and they've not been seen since. Like, even if you want to go as far as Christianity and Jesus or Islam with Muhammad, they both had connections with God. With Muhammad, he was the last prophet of God. Jesus, and according to the Christian faith, was a representation of, like, he was God on earth. He was the physical body of God that came to earth. And after he left, this was like 2,000 years ago. So after he left, that was it. We were abandoned by our God. If that's what you believe, if you believe in Jesus, then he left earth and, basically, peace, see ya. And he ascended bodily into heaven, and that was that. I'll see you next time I put my face on burnt toast. Like, I mean, is that the representation of God on earth now? Fucking burnt toast and oil stains?
Doritos and chicken nuggets?
Yeah. I got the merry chicken nugget, because that's the way my God manifests in America. Fried chicken and Jesus.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast? Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.